Hello and welcome to the September 9th JupyterLab weekly developers meeting. I guess we'll get kicked off with Darian to talk about his console work or anything else.
Yeah, so we've been iterating and experimenting with the console UI. Some of the stuff that I demoed last week, we've changed around a bit, and we finally decided to merge where we are and iterate from there. So the consensus was to not use a phosphor split panel because giving users the ability to resize the input area wasn't immediately obvious and was a bit cumbersome. That's not actually the task you're trying to accomplish. And the other thing is that the horizontal orientation was, at least for the time being, something we're scrapping. I've only seen that in one or two other places, and so we simplified a lot. We're just using pure CSS, and we have the input anchored at the bottom of your screen, and as you type, the input will grow to fit the content that you've typed, and we're just going to take it from there and see how people like it. So that was that required a bunch of work after the major CSS stuff that Brian did, but it's all in and it's working. And I was dependent on both that and the CSS stuff to create a standalone toolbar, because we're using it now in a couple spots and we're going to add one or two more, so it should really be on its own, and that's what I'm working on now. That's it for me.
All right, I guess we'll get started. Been working this week on the handling of third-party extensions for JupyterLab. We had spent time working around the output of Webpack after the entire compilation was done, and trying out different plugins that existed for Webpack, and turned out we just needed to write our own plugin. So now that's in a standalone repository called JupyterLab Extension Builder that has the plugin that morphs the output into something we want. It has our custom loader that uses the output of that the custom plugin, and a build script that an extension author uses to generate these artifacts. So what it does is it still takes the output of a Webpack build, the final output, and but at that we take it at the stage where we have all the parsed information about the pieces that made up that build. So we use all of that metadata to morph the output into the thing that we want, which is our custom defined function modules that have name and version mangled module package name and version in their module import paths, and then anything you require has a semver range attached to it. So the name of the package and a semver of the thing you're requiring, and then the full module path. So that allows us at runtime to given a require, we find the maximally meeting semver defined module that meets that requirement and provide that along with some caching and some optimizations thereof. But that means that we can worst case load duplicate code into the page, but only execute one. So we're performing last second deduping on the client. This enables us to not have Node running on the server. They can just extension authors distribute these bundles that have all the build assets they need, and we just consume them from a directory on the user's machine, similar to how the notebook extensions work now. So there's defined lab extensions directories in different places on the user's machine that can be used to look up where these things are, using the same configuration mechanism similar to the notebook extensions the way they work now. And anything that's dynamically required will have a public path to look in that folder. So it'll be lab extensions / the name of the extension. So we can pull any other assets if there are image files associated with it, or extra bundles not in the main bundle associated with the bundle. We can still fetch those from the appropriate location on disk. So we've got the repository, to providing those three tools, the plugin for Webpack, the loader to use the output of the plugin, and the build tool. We're in the PR that I have. We're currently using the build tool to generate the entry point to JupyterLab itself. So we're already dog fooding that. The next step is to I've got the lab extensions. I took the notebook extensions file and morphed it into a lab extensions file, and there's a test associated with that. So mimicking what it was existing on the notebook for notebook extensions, I just got to run that through now to finish this up and verify that we can dynamically add lab extensions that get added to the page and become plugins and loaded as the application starts. So they're defined by the user, they're assembled by the server. Right now, we're not doing anything but serving the bundles as is. Later, we can optimize and actually dedupe beforehand. But right now, everything goes up on the page, and the client does the dedupe phase. So that's where we're headed. As far as the infrastructure for it, Jason, I'll let him talk about how he plans to consume this from the standpoint of our guinea pig third-party extension. So just in time, Jason.
Actually, I had a question, if that's okay. What's the story for how we will allow an extension to override ours? So if you want to replace our command palette, what's the story for how a third-party extension does that without touching JupyterLab code?
So as far as the thing that is provided, the last one wins, the way the application is structured right now. So by virtue of we load ours first and then the extensions get loaded, last one in wins. So that right now is the mechanism for overriding a default. It could be to where no, actually everything is a lab extension. So all of our default plugins are actually just lab extensions. We could decide to do that. I wouldn't do that right now because that would explode the amount of duplication we have between those different plugins. So I would say at least until we have the server-side dedupe, we should just stick with the default slug, which returns an array of our default plugins.
Okay, but right now you can reliably have a third-party extension and it will override ours every single time because ours are loaded first?
Ours is explicitly loaded first, and then the third-party ones are loaded.
Theoretically.
Okay, cool. That's
we have yet to test it, but that's the plan.
No. It is enforced.
Oh, have you seen it work too? No.
I'm just saying the way the server is templating the HTML, it's loading ours first.
Yeah. Yep. So theoretically, everything should work.
Yes.
We have yet to test it just to make sure, but that's the plan. I have a quick question.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, so how are we handling right now the Webpack bundling if an extension depends on another extension? So I have my fancy widget library that depends on the IPyWidgets library. IPyWidgets, of course, is bundling up a bunch of stuff. Fancy widget library depends on Jupyter.js widgets, and I suppose, let's see, I guess it doesn't depend on the lab extension for widgets,
right?
But both of them,
You wouldn't depend on an extension entry point,
right?
An extension repo could have content that you would use from another extension, and you'd inherently right now have duplication.
Yep. And then deduped on the client side.
Deduped on the server or the client.
Yeah, and we have no way of, and then if they haven't installed IPyWidgets, and I've got my fancy library that depends on IPyWidgets, it would never load because in my extension point I would require IPyWidgets.
Yes.
And that would never be fulfilled, and there would be an error thrown from the dependency tree at the container
injection.
injection.
Extension command line mechanism, you would depend on the IPyWidgets one. So we hit earlier than that. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. Install time. Yeah.
And what we can do going forward in the future as an optimization for this is on the server side, based on what extensions are being loaded, we can create a final bundle. As part of the bundling tool, we can emit some commented metadata that makes it easy to parse from Python, and we can manually strip out exact duplicate dependencies in the process of generating that final bundle from Python without requiring Node. But like, we could do that after we get everything working with bundles that just have a bunch of stuff that's not actually executed.
Yeah,
that's an optimization in the future once everything works.
Yeah, right now,
Right.
Chris, we actually do have the markers between the defined modules. So we've done what we needed from the emit stage to do that.
Okay.
But we could only eliminate exact duplicates, right? I mean,
Yes.
Since we don't know who's going to
Only
require
exact.
what funky
Yeah.
semver range, right? So only exact duplicates. So I'm curious how much that would actually work in practice versus people compiling against slightly different patch versions of IPy widgets or something like that, or slightly different versions.
Really beneficial if people are depending on very common plugins, because they're going to end up depending on the same versions, whatever like the release version is.
Hopefully, I guess it depends on the cadence of that plugin's release cycle. Yeah, if there's long running plugins that everyone's depending on, then yeah. So my plan is to take what I've been working on reviewing Steve's stuff, and then we decided to split it out. Steve just finished splitting it out. So I'm reviewing what he's done with splitting it out, and then the plan is to use that to get IPy widgets and then BQplot working. So I'm right to the point where I'm looking at the stuff that Steve has split out now and using that with IPy and starting to look at how to use that with IPy widgets. So next week I'll have more to report on that. Steve, you're in charge.
Yes.
Is there anything else?
Harold, did you have anything you want to talk about?
Not really, just like Jason, as you go through the process of getting stuff working, if you could just do like markdown bullets or whatever, and we can iterate and do some at least minimal documentation, probably would be a good idea for others.
Thank you for continually reminding us. Very important reminders to blaze the trail behind us. Yeah.
That's right.
Jamie, anything?
Not this week. Maybe next week.
Okay.
Okay.
Chris?
Nope. I'm just advising as needed behind the scenes on some of this stuff.
Which we really appreciate.
I guess that's it for the recording.
I guess we should mention, for the benefit of the internet, the other huge thing that was merged this last week was Brian's work with the CSS styling. So Brian did a ton of work in relocating CSS files, actually converting from less to CSS variables. And he did a very minimal dark theme and a light theme based on just changing CSS variables. And so he's moving forward on that. Basically, what was set in place with the merged PR is that the infrastructure for where CSS files are, et cetera, and what basic variable names are being used in the pattern for variable names. And now his plan is, I think, to go through each extension and really clean up the CSS quite a bit. And I think the idea is that each extension owns its CSS, and there's not a huge distinction between structural and styling CSS, but each extension provides ways to theme it using CSS variables. So CSS variables essentially become the public API for theming an extension. And it may use root, global CSS variables that are used throughout the platform, or it may introduce its own CSS variables for extension-specific stuff. That's my understanding.
That's nice. And maybe we should discuss about adopting this approach in Phosphor as well to make it easier to actually theme the Phosphor widget parts.
Sure. And the idea is for IE, so IE 11 doesn't support CSS variables. It's our big sore thumb here. Does Safari support CSS variables? That's the other one that's usually lagging.
Yeah.
Yes, I believe so.
Okay.
It's only the IE and Edge that don't at the moment. IE
Okay.
never will because it's not getting any more
IE.
updates.
Yeah.
But Edge will at some point in the future. It's on their priority list.
Yeah. Okay. So the idea is IE 11 is still an important target for us, and so we will hard compile down a theme. So using some of these post processors that take out the CSS variables, and I think basically compile it down to standard CSS without variables. And so there'll be a fixed theme for IE 11 that obviously can't be extended very easily. You'll have to hard code your extensions to this theme, but that'll at least give us some minimal support for IE 11.
But I don't think you have to hard code your extensions to that theme. If you wanted to build your extension to run on IE, you would just need Node to run our tool to do your compilation yourself.
Right. Yeah.
So basically, what we're saying is for IE, if you need to run on IE, then before you package and deploy stuff, you're going to need Node, which I don't think is an unreasonable requirement.
When you were talking about the CSS folder structure, I don't know if you explicitly mentioned it or not, but now inside the same folder that has the TypeScript code, we have the CSS file. And before we had that in some cases, but in some cases the entirety of the CSS was in default theme. So it's just sort of nicer. And I'm really glad that we have just the one file per class, not structure and style, because I think originally that's what Brian wanted, but he must have just in the process of doing it realized you can't really disentangle those, because every widget is just a rectangle, and whatever you want to put in that rectangle you can do in whatever way you like. So anyway, I think this is great.
And then upcoming calendar items. So Brian and I are going to be working next week in New York. Brian and Paul Ivanov. Brian, Steve, Darian, you're coming too in 2 weeks. So Brian, Steve,
Yes.
Darian, me, and Paul Ivanov and Sylvan Corley will be working together in New York week after next, and that'll be a big push. We give a talk on Strata. Hopefully we'll have a ton of stuff to show for it, and this is sort of a week-long push to see what's finally needed for 0.9, and any design issues can be hashed out in person, and then we can report on those either in issues or in this meeting.
I think Ian Rose is also planning to attend. He's Fernando's new talk. Yep.
Cool.
So he'll be getting his feet wet there, and Brian can help onboard him there. This will be one of the big things he starts working on.
Awesome.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else, Steve?
And a reminder, I filled in my stuff on the HackPad. The link's in the chat. Please update your stuff. And with that, take care.